Hello, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today is a programme that's been requested by a member of our community. Olaf from Sweden says, rioting in Stockholm for 4 days straight and spreading. Anti-Islam sentiment on the rise as far-right parties calls for rubber bullets and water cannons. Olaf, we listen to you and thank you for inspiring this programme. So, as protests and riots in the suburbs of Stockholm damage property and the country's reputation for being tolerant, has Sweden's immigration policy failed? Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, we have Google Plus as a forum, Facebook, we have Twitter. There are so many ways that people can get to us and be part of the conversation, and they have started on all of our media platforms. What are you seeing?
And don't forget Reddit. It's been a very community-heavy topic for a while now, and it started with this tweet from Fatima, who wrote in, "Please cover Sweden and racial profiling. It would be great if someone could break the myth of Sweden being an anti-racist country." And then on the other hand, we've gotten tweets from people who say that Sweden is one of the most open and accepting countries in the world. So, of course, for those of you at home, we want to hear your thoughts on this issue. Tweet us. Just make sure you use the hashtag AJStream.
Now, sitting right beside Malika and myself is Trita Parsi. And Trita was born in Iran but moved with his family at the age of 4 to Sweden to escape political repression in Iran. He is also the founder and president of the National Iranian American Council. Trita, good to have you with us.
Great to have you back.
Look forward to hearing from you in just a little bit. Now, today's show is a great example of a programme that's been driven by your show suggestions. So keep your ideas coming. Tweet us your feedback plus ideas for future shows with the hashtag AJStream. It's just one more way you can be in the stream.
Hello, my name is Peter Kicharsky and I'm part of the Modern Bulgaria movement and I'm in the stream.
Sweden has long been considered a haven of equality and generous social welfare, but last week's riots have many questioning just how integrated the country really is. Sparked by the police shooting of an Iraqi immigrant, protests spread, turning violent and destructive. There's also rising discontent amongst the country's immigrant youth. Income inequality has hit the young and immigrants the hardest, with unemployment running at around about 16% among residents of foreign origin. So, has Sweden done any better than its European neighbours in assimilating its immigrant population? To help us dig a little deeper into this issue, on Skype from Norrköping, Sweden, Stefan Jonsson. He is the Professor of Ethnic Studies at Linköping University. From Stockholm, Sara Besser. She is the National Chairman of the Young Christian Democrats Party in Sweden. Nathan Hambleberg is a founding member of the non-profit The Betweenship, and that's an organisation that focuses on developing a multiracial Sweden. And finally, from Gothenburg, Sara Besser. She is a member of the Street Garris Network, a group of young women who try to have a positive impact in their communities. Welcome to you all. So let's start with Sara Besser. So you've been in Husby, which is one of the areas that had riots just recently, just in the last few days. I grew up in areas that have riots, and the atmosphere is really, really palpable. It's a sense of dread and anticipation and adrenaline all at the same time. When you were in Husby last, what was the atmosphere that you were getting from the local population?
The atmosphere was just totally comfortable. People were loving, want to help each other out, want to fix the situation. And by fixing, I'm talking about having a barbecue, just talking to each other, trying to focus on the positiveness. And it was just love. That was the only thing that we felt. When you're talking about dread, the only thing that we dreaded was hearing that Nazis were on the way and they had just been beating a woman down. So we were scared of that, not by people burning cars or anything like that. So the atmosphere was just love on Saturday, last time I was there.
Now, that was a particular event that the community and you were involved in, just to kind of push back a little bit on the reputation that Husby was beginning to get because of the riots. What are people saying to you as you were mixing with them?
They were happy that we, initiated this. It wasn't only we, it was local youths and older youths that were there who did this with us, guys, girls, companies who sponsored us to do this. We showed the Champions League final and people were happy. So basically the reactions we got was just, they were happy and it was just love. They were a bit disappointed though that the media wasn't there. They had been there the whole week and had almost been more journalists there than the people who lived there. And all of a sudden the media wasn't there. So a bit disappointed, but in general the feeling was just love and people were appreciative that we did this.
Nathan, give us a sense of the scale of the riots, because if you watch television, it looked like Sweden was on fire, and that is just not the case.
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, by Swedish standards, yes, it has been a rather unique situation, definitely. But I think it has also been greatly exaggerated in the media. Warlike reports where, the first nights there were some 4 cars burnt down. But yeah, sure, compared to what people are expecting to be hearing from Sweden, I guess it was a shock. And I think it was a shock to the Swedish politicians as well, because they haven't really done their math of how an area will react when it's been neglected for so long.
Mm.
Well, just asking, based on your question on what it was like, what the atmosphere is like, we're hearing from people online. Sidra writes in the area I live in, a rubbish dump and some cars were burnt at night. Absolutely unacceptable. But Trita, these next, few comments that we got from members of our community, I want you to have a listen to. Black writes in, the riots are not because of failed integration policies, but because of failed job economic policies. So moving this forward past, what we're seeing now into what this means, there's also a Facebook comment from Elge who says, the riots are not the results of failed integration of immigrants. They are the results of widening social gaps. This means that it's more relevant to see the riots as a form of class warfare than an integration problem. I want your thoughts on that, but as you're thinking about it, know that people are pushing back against that, and that follows up. I guess that explains why the rioters are exclusively immigrants. So you have these two sides saying it's because of failed integration policies, and you have another side saying, no, it's because they're immigrants.
I think it's a combination of both of these factors. On the one hand, you do have a situation in which there has been a failure of integration. When you have a situation, you mentioned, for instance, that unemployment for foreign-born is around 16%, but it's only 6.7% for those who are born in the country. We're talking about a difference of almost 10 percentage points. A study came out in Sweden just this last week that pointed out that Sweden is actually one of the worst countries when it comes to helping immigrants once they've come to the country to get into the job market. It on average takes 7 years to get a job. And you can imagine 7 years of unemployment before you actually get into the job market. So these two things I think are linked. But then there's a third factor that I think has made it all the more difficult and problematic, and it's the fact that there's been rises of anti-immigration sentiments in the past, but then there's always been this very active, visible effort by the political leadership of the country to push against those sentiments. There was this campaign, for instance, back in the 1980s called Rör inte min kompis, don't touch my friend. Now you have the opposite. You have a situation in which one of the parties in the parliament right now is an openly anti-immigrant, I would say, frankly, racist party. And then you have elements of other parties, including the sitting government, at times flirting and making remarks that are quite racist, and they keep their jobs. All of these things coming together creates a very explosive situation, unfortunately.
Let me bring in Stefan. Stefan, this is your area of study. If you looked at what's happened over the last week, what would you say was the cause of it? Is it social or is it racial?
Well, I would agree with the former speaker that this is not really the result of failed immigration policy. Sweden has quite a successful immigration policy compared to other European countries, I would say. What we have here, and Stockholm is an interesting case, because what Stockholm has experienced over the last 10 years or so, it's been a kind of neoliberal sandbox experiment where we have now in this capital of Sweden one of the most deregulated and marketized public spheres in Europe. There's been a huge redistribution of economic wealth, and I would say then that this has far much to do with a widening social gap between certain areas like Husby, like other areas around Stockholm, with the large immigrant population, and the city center where people are becoming incredibly wealthy. And two communities living side by side, it creates a lot of tensions. And some young people growing up in these areas, they simply feel that they don't have a chance to a job, and they encounter a racial discrimination often in the job market, which simply leaves them with very few opportunities in society. So this is definitely more to do with the social integration problem than with an ethnic integration problem.
Can you give us a sort of grassroots example of that? Because people outside of Sweden just marvel at the social welfare and the benefits and the free hospitals that you get, that they're really having trouble to understand why this would be an issue.
Well, if you look at the income statistics of Sweden, I mean, this is not really a grassroots example, it's sort of a statistics example. You would see over the last 20 years that the level of income for those in the lower 20% has remained pretty much the same, whereas the upper 20% have had increases around 100 and 200%. That's one thing. If you look at the schooling system in Sweden, there is now a general consensus that there is a crisis because there is a voucher system in Sweden where basically the money follows the student or the pupil, and schools can be freely established by private companies to earn for profit-making purposes, and schools then tend to be good in areas where people in areas with wealthy people.
Right.
And the schools in these underprivileged areas, they're simply not as good as the other ones. And this is because a huge deregularization of the schooling system. The same thing pertains in the healthcare sector, the same thing you can see in the social security services. So many areas around Stockholm have simply seen themselves being stripped of one thing after the other, and no one has really factored these things together, because they occur at the municipal level, the regional level, and the national level. And when all these come together, you get these areas which are impoverished, underprivileged, and really bad off.
Okay, Stefan, take a pause for a minute. There was something that came up on our website that really just jumped out at me, and it was one of our online audience called Tinny, and she said she took the train from Stockholm centre to Rinkeby, and it's like going from a bustling European city centre to a North African slum in just 20 minutes, which I think is probably the grassroots example that I was probably looking for. But you gave us a nice framework. Stefan, take a pause for a second, because we have 5 people in the conversation. Sara Kuttadal, let me just bring in the politician's point of view. I know you've been dying to jump in. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I realize that there are a lot of political powers right now claiming to have the solution for these riots. And some say that we simply need to build one more youth center or give more money to the schools, and this will end. But it's simply not true. These areas tend to actually get more money than most other city parts do. And people who grew up in these areas are not destined to fail, as some are claiming, but I think everyone actually have an opportunity to create their own future. I do, however, understand that a few people are frustrated. Being out of work or failing at school can cause that, and I think that's also a feeling that might be shared from a lot of people living the rural areas of Sweden. And if you on top of that believe the leftist message that there's nothing to gain from trying harder, then I think you can become angry for sure. And that's when it gets really dangerous, when you give up, because then you have nothing to lose. But there is no reason for giving up in Sweden. I think actually you can always change your life. And we need to change the self-image of these young men. And we need to tell them to work harder, not to give up.
Well, Sara Besser, I want to go back to you because I want to talk about some of the infrastructure things that our community members are picking up on. Khalid Bey tweets in, wealth disparities in Sweden beginning to resemble the US and can be mapped according to racial lines. He continues saying immigrants and minorities are always the scapegoats during times of crisis, even in quote unquote utopian Sweden. Now that racial element is something that you'll hear in this video comment. Have a listen and let me know your thoughts after.
There's one major issue that is neglected in discussion on Sweden, Stockholm and the riots, and that's racism, both institutional and structural racism. It's very important to remember that Sweden is a country which is in deep denial of both historical and contemporary racism. And this is one of the major factors why Sweden is on fire, both literally and figuratively speaking. And if Sweden continues to deny non-white people their civil liberties and dignity, we will see more riots in the future.
So Sara, she says that Sweden's in denial. What are your thoughts?
Well, I want to start off with saying that I don't think that Sweden is a racist country, though we have racists in Sweden. And unfortunately, we have racists in the government as well, with the Swedish Democrats. And we need to get that out. We can't talk about them just being, because they're not wanting to help us, that we've noticed. What I feel is, well, it's not a racist country, of course. We're talking about how people, you're talking about immigrants. Most of these kids are born here in Sweden. They are Swedes. We need to start talking about them as Swedish people. I'm born in Sweden. My parents are not. And I'm considered as being an immigrant. And that's an issue we need to talk about. In America, for example, we talk about Afro-Americans, talk about Italian-Americans. You talk about all of that, and you see them as American. In Sweden, I don't know how many generations of immigrants we have to go on until we all are going to be considered as Swedes, just like the ethnic Swedes, blonde and blue-eyed. So I think that's a very big issue. Myself, being a young person in the job market, I've met racism in many different forms. Sometimes in Sweden, they don't tell you racist stuff to your face, but you know that there's an underlying racist.
Sara, how do you know?
Yeah.
Give us an example.
Well, sometimes you hear that you get the job just because you are an immigrant, and not because you're good at what you do. And sometimes they tell you that, oh, we already have 2 Arabs, we can't have one more. But you have 20, 30, 100 ethnic Swedes, as you would call it, as our, as Fredrik Reinfeldt called it, ethnic Swedes, who have the job. So why shouldn't I, who is born here in Sweden, who is educated by the Swedish system, get the same job as anyone else?
All right, I'm just going to bring in a couple of different people. Nathan, I know you want to jump in, then we come to Trita as well. So Nathan, go ahead.
I want to start by saying I was in Rinkeby 2 days ago, and there was a bazaar, more or less like a street party in the daytime, people of all ages, and you could add, as always, people from all over the world, or with roots in all over the world. And to say that it's somewhere in North Africa is just to deny that Sweden is a multicultural society. That's 2 different things. But then I want to add to Sara to say that the message from the left, without implying which organization you're referring to, say that the left says that there is no hope in believing in yourself, etc. The group that has been most, or more than anyone else, implied as being inciting these riots, totally wrongfully, Megafonen, they've organized help for school kids twice on a weekly basis for a year or more, so having social activities, organizing people in the community. But they have also criticized this shooting by the police. Sweden has about twice as many fatal shootings per capita as all of our neighboring countries. This is one political issue that is blocked from being resolved within the ordinary democratic system, as well as many others. There is mass unemployment. That cannot be done away with individual achievement. That's a political issue, and that's what you're failing to see. And those political problems are hitting people in some of Sweden's working class and immigrant suburbs
Right.
the hardest.
Twitter.
Going back to some of the comments I said earlier on, I don't think Sweden is a racist country. But like all countries, unfortunately, racism does exist. And one of the things that have happened just in the last couple of years in Sweden that I think is extremely unfortunate is the fact that a racist discourse has become politically acceptable with the election of Sverigedemokraterna, and the fact that other parties are flirting with that because now they're I think they're the third largest party. The fact that other parties have started to use similar language to try to get some of those votes.
And what do you
that
mean
is
by
creating a very, very tense atmosphere. And I think the video message, I think there was a word that was being used that I think is very critical to understand.
Right.
She used the word dignity. I think there's no statistics, there's no economic numbers that you can show that would be able to measure the sense of dignity that people need to have. And when you have a situation in which the economy isn't going as well, there's a lot of social problems, and it's become socially acceptable to use racist discourse, it really goes at the dignity of people.
Because you've got an eye on Sweden because of your background, can you just give me very quickly an idea of what a racist discourse is? Because the rest of us outside of Sweden, we may not be aware of what you're talking about.
Well, the fact, for instance, that the Minister of Integration gave an interview not too long ago in which he essentially said that those who are hiding immigrants, it's not as if those are nice Swedish women hiding them. It's not as if they're being hid by nice people that are blonde and blue-eyed, essentially saying that being blonde and blue-eyed suddenly makes you a good person. The
Right.
fact that that was said twice and the person keeps his job is signaling that apparently it's okay to say things like that right now.
We don't have the minister here, but we actually spoke to him this morning. So this is the Minister for Integration, and we asked him about how diverse Sweden was and the issues that Sweden is currently facing. Eric Ullenhag, this is what he said.
But you should remember that out of the 15% of the foreign-born in Sweden, many people are going to jobs every day. You know, you have every third doctor working in Swedish hospitals today is born abroad. Every fourth dentist is born abroad. So Sweden has become, the last decades, a diverse society, but we still have huge challenges to open up the Swedish labor market to refugees.
Actually, it wasn't him who said that. That
Okay.
was a different minister, just
All
to
right.
be clear, because he
Okay.
actually completely distanced himself from that comment.
Excellent. So that comment started off a lot of conversation amongst all of our guests. They're all dying to get in, and you know where to go for the continuing conversation at stream.aljazeera.com. But right now, here are some stories that Malika is also following.
We'll kick off in Senegal, where a new kind of newscast is born.
Bienvenue, installez-vous, on a des nouvelles pour vous, il y a des bonnes, il y a des mauvaises, mais il y a des nouvelles pour vous. Pas une semaine ne passe sans qu'un immeuble ne tombe, comme si le Jola ne suffisait pas comme hécatombe. Construction instable, comme des châteaux de sable, parfois même le coupable n'est pas le vrai responsable.
This weekly rap journal is brought to you by Yonamar, or Fed Up, the rap activist collective who led the charge against former Senegalese President Abdoulaye Wade and his bid for a third term. Rap Journal is broadcast in both French and Wolof, and its hosts rhyme about everything from government corruption to the war in Syria. It counts tens of thousands of views on YouTube, as well as a spot on national TV. We turn to Egypt next, where an act of vacation vandalism has made one Chinese teenager infamous online. Take a look at this photo. A 14-year-old tourist from Nanjing scratched his name inside a 3,500-year-old temple in Luxor, Egypt. The inscription reads, "Ding Zhenhao was here." The photo went viral on Chinese social media, with many denouncing the act. And it comes just 2 weeks after China's vice premier called out tourists from his country for, quote, uncivilized behavior. The teen's parents have apologized to Egyptians in statements to the press. And on to our last lead, hashtag guitar in the OR. To celebrate its 500th brain pacemaker implant, a medical center in Los Angeles posted this Vine showing a patient playing his guitar while under the knife. The patient was being treated for a disease that affected his ability to play his guitar, and things appear to be looking up. As always, those are today's leads. We want to hear from you, so tell us what's catching your eye using hashtag AJString. Femi?
You know, Trita and I are leaning forward to try and look inside the brain, and we can't see a thing. Thank you very much for sharing those stories with us. Stream.aljazeera.com is where we'll be next, and tomorrow we'll be talking about Muslim guilt. Just because you're Muslim and there's been an act of terror, why should you have to apologise for it? That's our conversation tomorrow. Don't miss it. In the meantime, we will see you Online. Hello again, welcome back to the Streams Online post show. Today we're taking a look at what the last week's riots meant for Sweden and its large immigrant population. Joining me here in the studio, just to remind you, we have Trita Parsi. On Skype from Norrköping, Sweden is Stefan Jonsson. He's a professor of ethnic and migration studies at Linköping University. In the Google Plus Hangout, Sara Besser. She is the national chairman of the Young Christian Democrats Party in Sweden, and Nathan Hambleberg of the non-profit organisation The Between Ship, and Sara Besser, a member of the Street Gallus Network. I am going to fail my Swedish homework, but I'm doing my best, team. Thank you so much. Just as we were beginning to leave that conversation in the main show, everybody was bubbling up and wanting to have a conversation as well. I want to show our audience watching, though, just something very quickly on my computer, just to give you a sense of how accessible Sweden is. So the grey line here are the asylum seekers that were accepted in 2011. In 2012 is the orange line, so that's 44,000. And so far this year, we're still on track in Sweden for asylum seekers being accepted, and looks like it may well even overtake 44,000 immigrants, asylum seekers coming into Sweden, which gives you an idea of how open and accessible Sweden is as a country. Now let's go back to our political voice, Sara Besser. Sara, I know you were dying to jump into the conversation. Where do you want to take us next?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the people talking about these riots as the society should be broken. And I think there's a need to emphasize that there are a very small amount of people that actually are involved in these riots, leaving normal, honest people in the crossfire of these vandals, basically. And I think that regarding integration, we surely have a problem there, but I think most Swedes want Sweden to stay an open and tolerant society, and we do see that some organizations try to gain from the polarization of the debate, and populists who blame our country's immigration policy is one of them. And I think that one thing that we should do is to encourage more countries to take responsibility for this, and we are one of the generous ones within the European Union, and I think that other countries should share this responsibility as well.
So Sara, that sounds like maybe you're feeling overwhelmed that you're taking too many immigrants in by wanting to share, can I say, the burden perhaps?
No, I wouldn't say the burden. I think Sweden needs immigration, and we need a different kind of immigration. We have been very generous in welcoming refugees, which we have a responsibility of doing, but we also want to open up for more of workforce immigration as well, because we have simply in the future we will need more people joining the job force. So I think that we should not close our borders, but we need to encourage other countries of opening them as well, because we see that a lot of people needs to find asylum, basically.
Could I please say something?
Go ahead.
Yes, I feel like this conversation has gone a totally different way. We're talking about immigration, and I feel very offended by that, because we are considered as not being Swedish. The people who live in Husby, most of them have lived there for 30 years. They have been there for, they are born there, they live there their whole life. So talking about immigration, it's just the wrong way to go. We need to talk about class issues. We need to talk about social issues. We need to talk about all that. Talking about immigration is pretty much taking the issue away, taken away from the problem, basically.
Can I say
it's the wrong
something?
way to go.
Everybody can say something. Is that Professor?
Okay.
Oh no,
Yes,
it's Nathan. Let me do Nathan and
mean-
then the Professor.
Yeah, I basically agree with what Sara said right now, and I totally disagree with what Sara before that said. Sara from the Christian Democratic Youth, you said that Sweden is taking a lot of responsibility in the European Union for immigration. First of all, I'm born in Sweden, as so very many other people who are being seen as immigrants are. But if we're speaking about immigration, Sweden is the country in the world that earns most money per capita from arms sales. Right now, we are the only country in the European Union that is effectively supporting the regime in Syria at the same time as we're helping Saudi Arabia to build arms factories. In that situation, to talk about us being more responsible is totally ignorant. Second, since the Arabian Spring, some corrupt dictators that used to help the European Union in keeping migrants away have fallen, and since that migration has increased, and because as a response to that, there's a stop and frisk policy called REVA that is targeted at anyone not looking Swedish, and that affects the people just like Sara Besser, who is born in Husby, but doesn't look traditionally Swedish.
Sorry, born in Stockholm, not Houston.
Okay.
Yeah. But again,
made and born in Sweden, basically, made in Sweden.
Just as myself, I've been stopped and frisked, and that policy is defended by this government.
Right.
Although it's in violation of the Constitution.
Okay, Nathan, you made a good point. I really want to get the community in, and then I have to go to the professor, and I have to go to Trita, and I have like 3 minutes, so this is going to be interesting how I do this. Malika.
There's a lot to get in. It's a juggling act. But Trita, I'm going to pose this to you. We have a couple of comments pushing back on migrants themselves. Victor on Facebook says, as a fellow immigrant, suck it up. Accept the fact that as an immigrant, you have to work 3 times as hard as a native to achieve the same thing. So buckle down and quit whining or go back home. That's kind of echoed by Julian, who says the incoming cultures are not adapting to the new world. They keep their language and traditions, and more than anything else, they keep their religion, Islam, which is the antithesis to the developed thinking of the Swedes. And a video comment. Have a listen and then let me know your thoughts.
Hi, I felt compelled to comment on the question, is Sweden doing enough to help integrate its immigrant population? I believe Sweden is hosting many people from many different countries, affording them international protection, shelter, safety, medical, education, financial assistance. I'm just wondering what the immigrants themselves are actively doing to integrate into the Swedish population. And I'll be very interested to hear from the immigrants themselves to see what efforts they are making and where Sweden is failing them.
You want to tackle those?
A lot of different things. I think clearly integrating yourself is an important thing, as the video message said. But the first step of integration is to be able to get a job. And when you have a job market that unfortunately is relatively close, if your Swedish is not good enough, as the statistics I mentioned earlier on, 7 years before you can get a job, the sense of being outside of society becomes extremely strong. I think we have to walk away from one thing that I sense in this conversation, which is a lot of finger pointing and saying, well, this is the immigrants' fault or this is that fault. This is frankly, as was mentioned earlier on, not necessarily an immigration problem. Per se. Sweden is a tremendously generous country when it comes to immigration. It's taking more Iraqi refugees than the United States has, even though the United States invaded Iraq and has a population 30 times the size of Sweden. But when you combine those things with a relatively inflexible job market and a desire to be a multicultural society, but not necessarily the full grasp of what it means to be multicultural. If you're truly multicultural, you cannot complain that other people are Muslims or have a different faith, because multicultural means that you are accepting all different cultures within your own society. And I think Sweden, a country that has gone from having 5% foreign-born people in 1960 to 15% today, is going through some very, very fast changes right now.
Professor, I don't like to ask a professor to be brief, Professor, and you don't have a couple of points. But can you leave us with one point? Sorry, Professor, can you just leave us with one point, the one you feel is most critical, because we're literally at the very end of the program.
This is not a Swedish problem, it's a European-wide problem where a lot of people are becoming superfluous. It is also not an immigration problem, it's a social problem, because of policies that are making people superfluous. These are the 2 important points. If we continue to talk about this in terms of immigration and culture, we are, as many other people already pointed out, on the very, very wrong track. And there is a danger in that way that immigration is posed as the problem, which plays into the hands of the fascist groupings all around Europe, which are now forcefully trying to prosecute, kill, and drive out all people that are not of the same culture as themselves.
Thank you very much. You had the last word in this conversation. Thank you to all of our guests for helping us understand a little better what's been happening in Sweden over the last couple of weeks, and also about how they deal with a changing, a different Sweden. Now, what are we doing tomorrow? On Tuesday's programme, please don't let it be a Muslim. That thought races through the minds of many Muslims when first hearing about any act of terror. But why are Muslims expected to apologise for atrocities committed by individuals who merely happen to be of the same faith? That is a conversation for another day. In the meantime, we will see you online.